On a quiet army base, laughter echoed when a young soldier rolled up her sleeve to reveal a bold tattoo. But within seconds, the mood shattered, because when the Navy SEAL commander saw it, he stood frozen, and then raised his hand in a salute. Tuck. Scorching afternoon sun cast long shadows across the wide expanse of the U.S. military base, where the echoes of marching drills had only just faded, leaving behind a restless group of young recruits scattered near the training yard, their laughter loud and careless, boots tapping against the gravel as they joked to ease the exhaustion of the day. Among them stood a young female soldier, her uniform crisp yet sweat-stained, her eyes sharp, her posture unyielding, the kind of stance that suggested she had seen far more than her age revealed. And as the group teased one another, she suddenly rolled up her sleeve with deliberate slowness, revealing a tattoo inked deep across her forearm, its lines bold, jagged, yet graceful, carrying a symbol unfamiliar to most of the recruits, something that immediately drew smirks and chuckles. One soldier nudging another with a grin, mocking her as if the ink was nothing more than a childish attempt to look fierce. The laughter spread quickly, bouncing between the ranks. But she stood motionless, letting their words hang in the hot air, her expression carved from stone, and though their taunts stung, she did not waver, because she knew the story behind. That tattoo was not one of vanity but of sacrifice, of legacy, written into her very skin. Still, the ridicule grew louder until, suddenly, the sound of measured boots striking against the gravel cut through their amusement like a blade, forcing the recruits to stiffen, their backs instinctively straightening as the towering figure of a Navy SEAL commander emerged from the corner of the barracks, his uniform immaculate, rows of ribbons gleaming in the sunlight, his aura radiating the kind of authority that silenced even the most reckless whispers. And when his eyes caught sight of the tattoo, he stopped in his tracks, his expression unreadable at first, the silence stretching unbearably as the recruits waited for his verdict, their earlier arrogance trembling in the face of his authority. Then, without a word, the commander stepped forward, his gaze locked on the young woman's arm, and in a move that froze every breath in the yard, he slowly raised his hand to his brow, delivering a sharp, deliberate salute, one filled not with mockery, but with respect so profound it carried the weight of history. And as the stunned recruits watched in silence, their laughter died in their throats, replaced by a heavy, chilling realization that whatever that tattoo meant, it demanded reverence even from a SEAL commander, and that the soldier they had mocked stood for something far greater than any of them had understood. The air around the training yard felt heavier after the salute, as if the very ground had absorbed the shock that rippled through the young recruits, none daring to whisper or move, while the SEAL commander's hand dropped back to his side with the precision of a man forged in battle, his eyes never leaving. The young woman who now stood taller than ever before, her tattoo exposed like a banner of truth. The silence lingered until the commander finally spoke, his voice gravelly yet commanding, cutting through the stillness with a weight that seemed to strike every recruit in the chest. As he told them that the mark she carried was not just ink, but the crest of a classified SEAL unit, one whose legacy was etched in sacrifice, valor, and missions most of them could never imagine. Missions where men far more experienced than they had laid down their lives for freedom, and that this young soldier's father had been one of those men, a decorated SEAL who never returned from an operation overseas, his memory honored within the brotherhood of warriors. The recruits shifted uncomfortably, their bravado collapsing under the realization that their laughter had mocked not a tattoo, but a symbol of blood, honor, and a family's unbroken tie to the military's deepest traditions. And while shame flushed their faces, the commander took one step closer to the young woman, addressing her with the kind of respect rarely shown to a new recruit, acknowledging her lineage, her strength to carry that legacy forward, and assuring her that the same brotherhood which had honored her father now honored her. The yard remained still, the only sound the distant hum of helicopters circling above, as the commander dismissed the recruits with a stern warning that respect on this base was earned not through arrogance or rank, but through sacrifice, and, as the others dispersed in silence, the young woman lowered her sleeve slowly, her heart pounding, not from the sting of mockery but from the pride of knowing she had been seen, truly seen, and the image of the commander's salute burned in her. Memory as a promise that her journey in this brutal, unrelenting world of the U.S. military had only just begun. That night, as the sun dipped behind the horizon and the base lights flickered on, casting long pools of yellow across the tarmac, the young woman lay awake on her bunk in the barracks, her mind racing with the weight of what had happened earlier. In the day, replaying the mocking laughter of her fellow recruits, the cold silence that followed, and finally, the image of the SEAL commander standing tall, his salute delivered with the gravity of a man who had buried too many brothers and sisters in arms. She stared at the tattoo etched on her forearm, the lines illuminated faintly by the glow of the overhead lamp, and though she had carried it for years, tonight it felt heavier than ever, as though the ink itself pulsed with the legacy of her father, a man she had barely known but whose shadow defined her entire life, a hero who had died in a place she had never seen, fighting an enemy she would never meet, leaving behind nothing but folded flags, worn photographs, and the whispers of comrades who spoke his name with reverence. Outside, the muffled sound of boots striking the concrete drifted in, a late patrol moving through the base, and with it came the faint chorus of crickets in the distance, blending the harshness of military order with the quiet reminder that life always carried on. She thought about the commander's words, how his voice had carried the weight of both discipline and compassion, reminding her that she was not just another recruit, but a torch-bearer of a bond forged long before she was born, a living link between her father's sacrifice and the brotherhood that had embraced it. Yet despite that honor, doubt gnawed at her. Could she live up to the expectations that seemed carved into her skin? Or would she crumble under the pressure of proving herself in a world where weakness was punished mercilessly? As the barracks filled with the sound of snoring and restless tossing, she slipped quietly from her bunk, lacing her boots with shaking hands, drawn toward the empty training yard where the moonlight glinted off the obstacle course, its looming walls and ropes, standing like silent sentinels daring her to try, to fail, to rise again. And so she began to push herself in the darkness, climbing, crawling, dragging her aching body across the dirt until sweat soaked her uniform and her muscles trembled. But still she pressed on, whispering her father's name. Each time her strength wavered until at last, as she reached the top of the final wall and stood silhouetted against the stars, she felt something shift inside her, a fire that burned brighter than fear, brighter than pain. And though no one was watching, though the yard was empty save for shadows and echoes, she saluted into the night, not for the commander, not for the recruits, but for the man whose blood gave her this burden, and for the woman she was becoming, forged by steel, scarred by loss, yet unbroken, ready to claim her place in the unforgiving world of the United States military. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of that first salute became the quiet storm fueling her every step, every drill, every grueling exercise that pushed her body to the edge of collapse, for while the other recruits often grumbled beneath their breath, stealing moments of rest. When the drill sergeants looked away, she carried on without faltering, as if some unseen force was driving her, every drop of sweat another word in the unspoken oath she had made to herself that night beneath the stars. To rise not only for her father's legacy, but for her own name, her own worth, her own right to stand among warriors. The base, with its endless routines of discipline and exhaustion, became her crucible, and though the laughter that once mocked her had vanished, replaced now with sidelong glances of respect tinged with guilt, she refused to be distracted, knowing That true recognition could not be demanded but earned in the fire of trials that left lesser recruits broken and begging to quit. One dawn, as the sky bled from black to crimson, she and her unit were summoned to the proving ground, where the SEAL commander himself stood waiting, flanked by senior officers whose silence carried a gravity that chilled even the most hardened. Recruits. And it was announced that today they would face a trial that separated the ordinary from the extraordinary, a simulation designed to crush their spirits, a relentless gauntlet of endurance, strategy, and willpower, known on the base as the Forge, whispered about in late-night conversations with equal parts fear and awe. The recruits' hearts thundered in their chests as they set out, burdened with weighted packs, dragging themselves through mud, scaling walls slick with water, crawling under barbed wire as live rounds cracked overhead. Every second a test of courage and clarity, and though many faltered, collapsing into the dirt, begging for it to end, she pushed forward, her breath ragged but steady, her eyes blazing with the memory of the commander's salute and the echo of her father's sacrifice, and when her legs shook so violently she thought they might give way, she bit down on her pain and rose again, dragging her body forward inch by inch until the course itself seemed to bow to her unbreakable will. At last, when dawn gave way to the full glare of morning, and the survivors, few as they were, stumbled into the clearing where the commander stood waiting, he locked eyes with her, and though he said nothing at first, his gaze carried a fire that told her he had seen every moment, every refusal to quit, every step she had taken through agony, and before the eyes of those who had once laughed at her, he stepped forward once more and delivered another salute. Sharper, deeper, heavier than the first, not just to her tattoo, not just to her father's legacy, but to her, to the soldier she had become, forged in fire and unbroken by doubt. In that moment, the recruits who had mocked her lowered their heads, ashamed yet humbled, realizing that they had witnessed the rise of a warrior destined to carry more than a name, more than a symbol, for she was no longer the girl they had laughed at. She was the embodiment of sacrifice, the living testament of resilience, and in the sacred silence of that salute, the base itself seemed to breathe with reverence, as if it too recognized that a new chapter in its proud history had been written not in ink, but in sweat, pain, and unyielding resolve.